Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story that's going to make your chest tighten just a little. You probably won't survive this story without pausing once to breathe. It's that close to real life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here. I promise this one will haunt you the next time you hear the word family. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. The night everything changed began like any other Wednesday evening. I remember the clink of a spoon against a ceramic cup, the way my husband always stirred his tea, even though the sugar had already dissolved. We were both in our late 60s, comfortably invisible to the world outside, but still tethered by decades of shared silence. You never realize how much sound one human being makes until they're gone. The coughs, the hums, the occasional sighs that fill the house like wallpaper. When the silence came, it was so complete it felt staged. He'd gone to bed early, said his chest felt heavy. I thought it was indigestion. By midnight, the paramedics were whispering in codes and avoiding my eyes. It was a heart attack, they said. Fast, merciful. That word, merciful, hung in the air like incense after a funeral. It burns your throat while pretending to comfort you. In those first hours, you expect something cinematic, tears, wailing, dramatic gestures. Instead, there's paperwork. So many forms, signatures, phone calls. People still debate whether grief or bureaucracy kills you faster. I called my eldest son, Ethan, around 2 a.m. He answered with a tone that sounded more inconvenienced than shocked. "I'll come in the morning," he said. My daughter, Lily, texted a heart emoji and then wrote, "We'll handle it, Mom. Handle it," as if her father's death was a scheduling problem. By dawn, I sat in the living room with the same cold cup of tea from the night before, watching the sun crawl through curtains he had chosen 20 years ago. There's a strange fact about family mourning rituals. People rarely come to comfort. They come to confirm. To confirm the death is real. To confirm their role in the aftermath. To confirm what's left for them. In my culture, widows often wear white for a year, but no one tells you what color loneliness comes in after that. When my children arrived, they didn't hug me. They hugged each other. Lily had her hair tied in a neat bun, wearing that efficient black blazer she wore to every serious occasion. Ethan came with a folder under his arm. No flowers, just documents. Even before the funeral, there was talk about responsibilities. I heard Ethan whisper to his wife, "It's better we sort things out before it gets messy." Messy. That word echoed in my head all day like an insult in disguise. The funeral itself was a blur of faces I didn't recognize. Neighbors brought casseroles. Relatives brought condolences rehearsed from old TV dramas. I stood beside the coffin, nodding as people said, "He lived a good life." Did he? He worked 6 days a week, built everything with his hands, and died holding his chest alone while I searched for aspirin in the next room. People still debate whether a long marriage means happiness or simply endurance. I'll tell you this, it means knowing exactly which drawers the medicine is in and which memories you pretend never happened. When everyone left that evening, the house exhaled again. I looked around at the framed photos, weddings, birthdays, trips. Each one a captured moment, pretending to mean something eternal. But that night, I noticed a strange detail. Every photo where it was just the two of us was slightly tilted as if gravity itself wanted to erase the evidence. Maybe my mind was playing tricks, or maybe houses know when their anchors are gone. I tried sleeping in our bed, but the empty half glared at me. So I moved to the armchair in the living room, clutching his old sweater, still faintly smelling of aftershave and sawdust. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps. For a moment, I thought, ridiculously, that he had come back, that the universe had changed its mind. But it was just Ethan going through the drawers in the study. I didn't say anything then. I just watched his shadow move against the wall like a thief practicing guilt. The next morning, I made breakfast like always, 2 cups, 2 plates, old habits clinging like ghosts. When Ethan finally sat down, he said, "Mom, we should probably start thinking about the estate. The estate." He said it like a stranger reading from a manual. I looked at him and saw not my son, but an investor analyzing assets. Later that afternoon, Lily came by with her laptop. She smiled too much. "Mom, I'll help you handle the utilities, okay? We'll put everything under my name to make it easier." Easier for whom, I wondered. There's a known statistic that 60% of family conflicts start over inheritance. The number climbs to 80% when property is involved. People still debate whether money changes people, but I think it just unmasks them. That night, I stood by the window watching the rain blur the garden lights. My husband used to plant roses there every spring. I wondered who would water them now. Probably no one. Grief, I realize, doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in quietly like water under a locked door. I thought about Ethan rummaging through papers, about Lily's smile that didn't reach her eyes, about the folder sitting on the table marked estate planning. Somewhere between those thoughts, I understood I wasn't just a widow now. I was an obstacle. And obstacles in a family like mine never last long. By the third day after the funeral, my home no longer smelled like lavender and old coffee. It smelled like other people's perfume, printer ink, and impatience. You'd think grief slows time, but it actually speeds up everyone else. My children moved in claiming they were looking after me. But within hours, boxes appeared. Closets were emptied, drawers labeled. They weren't settling in, they were taking inventory. It was like watching your life turned into an estate sale while you were still alive to witness it. I remember walking into the kitchen one morning and finding Lily at the dining table surrounded by papers, spreadsheets, and sticky notes. "We need to make sure everything's accounted for," she said without looking up. "Everything," I asked. She replied, "Well, Dad left a lot behind. It's just good to stay organized." Organized, such a polite word for territorial conquest. It's funny how words can wear masks. People say organized when they mean control, help when they mean take over. Ethan took charge of the garage, muttering something about valuable tools. My husband's old workshop was sacred ground. The smell of varnish oil and sawdust used to follow him into every room, and now Ethan was tossing half of it into black trash bags like debris after a storm. I heard the clang of metal, the sound of history being cleaned out. I asked him to stop. He said, "Mom, these are just old scraps. Old scraps." The same hands that built our house had touched those tools. They built the dining table where we shared every birthday, the crib where Ethan once slept. Funny, isn't it? What's sacred to one generation becomes clutter to the next. People still debate whether sentimentality is a strength or a weakness, but I've learned it's just a slow form of love. By noon, my living room looked like a temporary office. My daughter-in-law Claire sat on the couch typing furiously on her laptop. "I'm helping Ethan update your financial documents," she said sweetly, like she was doing me a favor. My grandchildren ran through the hallway laughing, knocking over the vase my husband bought in Florence 30 years ago. No one even noticed when it shattered. I wanted to pick up the pieces, but Ethan said, "Don't worry about it, Mom, it's replaceable." But that was the point. It wasn't. Nothing from the past ever is. There's a strange fact about inheritance law that most people don't know. In some states, widows can be deemed non-essential dependents if the estate passes through adult children. It's an old legal loophole, barely used, but real. I read about it once years ago in an article about family disputes gone wrong. I used to think that could never happen in my family. Now I wasn't so sure. At dinner that night, no one sat in my husband's chair. Not out of respect, it was just awkward spacing. The conversation was all about plans. "We'll probably need to update the insurance," Ethan said between bites, "and maybe get the house appraised soon," added Lily. My fork froze mid-air. Why, I asked. "Oh, it's just procedure," Lily said. "You wouldn't want things to get complicated later." Complicated. That's how my family described grief now, a bureaucratic inconvenience. The food tasted like cardboard. No one noticed when I barely ate. They were too busy discussing which lawyer was cheaper and how to simplify the estate. Claire even suggested turning the basement into a rental for extra income. I didn't have the heart to tell her that's where my husband kept the boxes of love letters, old film reels, and forgotten souvenirs. Some things aren't meant to generate profit. They're meant to remind you that you once mattered. Later that evening, I walked past Lily's room and overheard her whispering on the phone. "Yes, she's fine," she said. "She doesn't even ask about the finances. It'll be smooth once we get the paperwork done." Smooth. That word wrapped around my chest like a noose. I suddenly realized my presence wasn't comfort, it was inconvenience. I wasn't a grieving widow anymore. I was an administrative delay. I tried to distract myself by baking cookies the next morning like I used to when the kids were little. The smell of butter and sugar filled the kitchen. For a brief moment, I imagined laughter, the clinking of plates, my husband's teasing voice asking for just one more. But when I offered the cookies to my family, Ethan said he was watching his diet. Lily said she didn't eat carbs, and Claire smiled apologetically, holding her protein shake. Even my grandchildren preferred store-bought snacks. The tray of warm cookies sat untouched like an artifact from another time. People still debate whether children owe their parents affection or just care. I used to think love was unconditional, but maybe it's more like a subscription renewed only if it still benefits them. I started noticing things going missing: a gold bracelet, a silver frame, a few of my husband's cufflinks. When I asked, Ethan said, "We're just keeping them safe for now." Safe. That word again. It used to mean protection. Now it meant possession. That night, as I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I overheard Claire laughing softly in the living room. "She still thinks it's her house," she whispered. They all laughed. Even Lily. The sound cut deeper than anything else that week. I stood in the dark hallway, my hand pressed against the wall, feeling the cool paint under my fingers. This was the same wall where we once measured the children's heights, marking every inch of their growth. I used to think the house carried our history like a proud diary. Now it was just a ledger waiting to be balanced. And then as I reached my room, I heard Ethan say something that made me freeze. "We'll figure out where to move her after everything's settled." Move me. As if I were an old sofa or a problem to be relocated. That was the moment it truly hit me. My husband's death hadn't just taken away my partner. It had stripped me of my role, my name, my place. My children were no longer my children. They were my heirs. And heirs don't love, they calculate. The morning after that conversation, I woke up before sunrise like I always used to, when my husband was alive. The quiet before dawn was once our sacred hour. He'd sit by the window with his tea while I made toast, and we'd talk about nothing and everything. But now, even the kettle sounded hesitant, as if it knew its whistle had lost its audience. The air in the kitchen felt heavier, denser, filled with the scent of yesterday's arguments and unspoken intentions. I laid out the plates automatically, muscle memory, still believing that family breakfasts were sacred. By the time Ethan came downstairs, the table was ready: toast, eggs, fruit, coffee. But instead of gratitude, he greeted me with a distracted, "Mom, did you find Dad's insurance documents?" I said, I hadn't looked yet. His jaw tightened. "We really need to get that sorted," he said. No good morning, no eye contact. Lily joined us next, typing something furiously on her phone. She didn't even sit down. "I'll grab something later," she murmured, scrolling. Her husband followed, asking if the Wi-Fi password had changed, as if the house had suddenly become an Airbnb. I tried to make a joke about how the Wi-Fi works better when people say thank you, but it fell flat. No one laughed. It was like I'd become invisible in my own home. There's a strange phenomenon in grief psychology. People often withdraw emotionally from those who remind them of loss. I once read that in a magazine. It said, "The widow becomes a mirror." Maybe that's what I was now, a reflection of something too uncomfortable to face. My children avoided my gaze, not out of cruelty, but because every wrinkle, every sigh, every quiet stare reminded them of mortality. Still, knowing that didn't make it hurt less. When I sat down to eat, no one joined me. They hovered near the kitchen island, talking about valuations documents and legal deadlines. I heard Lily say, "If we handle it fast, we won't have to pay extra taxes." Taxes. My husband had been gone less than 2 weeks, and already his life was reduced to paperwork and percentages. I pushed my plate away. "Do you remember how your father loved breakfast?" I asked quietly. No one answered. Claire smiled awkwardly and said, "He was such a morning person," then went back to her laptop. That's when I noticed they weren't calling me Mom anymore. Not often, anyway. It became her or she. She didn't sign that form yet. Did she talk to the lawyer? Ask her where the spare keys are. I sat there listening, pretending to stir my coffee. People still debate whether words have power or if it's just our reaction to them that hurts. But when your own children stop calling you by your name, you start to feel like a ghost at your own table. After they left for their errands, I stood by the sink, staring at the half-empty cups and crumbs left behind. The silence felt almost alive, like the house itself was grieving with me. I rinsed the plates, then paused at one cup, my husband's old mug. It was chipped at the rim, stained with years of tea. Ethan had almost thrown it out last week, saying, "You have enough cups." But I kept it. Because it wasn't a cup, it was continuity. I dried it gently and placed it back on the shelf right where it always belonged. Later that afternoon, the lawyer came by, a polished man with a kind smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Hartman," he said, shaking my hand as though we were meeting for a business deal. He sat at the dining table, the same place where my husband and I once played cards after dinner and spread out folders. Ethan and Lily joined him, eager and alert. I sat at the corner trying to stay composed. "Your husband left a clear will," the lawyer began. He was quite organized. The tone implied surprise, as if it were rare for a man to die prepared. He explained everything in slow bureaucratic language: how assets would be divided, how the house was jointly owned, how investments would be distributed. I caught fragments: primary beneficiary, equal shares, minor discrepancies, but one sentence shattered me. Certain provisions suggest that the children will assume managerial control over family assets until the estate fully transfers. I frowned. "Managerial control over me," the lawyer smiled gently. "Oh no, Mrs. Hartman, just over certain accounts, expenditures, and estate decisions. It's standard." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Don't worry, Mom, we'll take care of it." Take care of it. That phrase again. I used to love when my husband said it. It meant he'd handle the heavy lifting. But from my son, it sounded like eviction wrapped in politeness. When the lawyer left, I asked Ethan why he didn't consult me before making arrangements. "You're too emotional right now," he said. "We're just trying to make things easier. People still debate whether control in a family is protection or dominance. The lines blur when love wears the disguise of management." That night, I stayed awake listening to the faint sound of the TV downstairs, laughter from my grandchildren, the clicking of Lily's laptop keys. Life went on around me, but I was no longer part of it. I was a background character in their version of my story. Around midnight, I went downstairs to get water. The kitchen light was still on. There on the table were papers labeled Property Adjustment Agreement. My name was on them, my signature too, only I hadn't signed anything. My stomach turned cold. I picked up the page and saw a faint outline where someone had traced my signature. Not perfect, but close enough to fool an official eye. I stood frozen, the refrigerator humming behind me, realizing that the silence at breakfast wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. From that moment, the house didn't just feel cold, it felt occupied. I went back to my room and sat in the dark, clutching that forged document. Somewhere downstairs, my son's laughter echoed, faintly warm and careless. I used to think betrayal came with shouting and confrontation, but it doesn't. It comes softly dressed in silence during breakfast. And the worst part, it always starts with family. The next time the lawyer came, the house already looked less like mine. The curtains had been replaced. Lily said the old ones smelled like memories, whatever that meant. Ethan had moved some furniture to create space, though it felt more like erasing footprints. When Mr. Collins, the lawyer, arrived, everyone sat around the dining table again, except me. I lingered by the doorway like an uninvited guest. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and tension. "Let's finalize everything today," he said cheerfully, his tone far too bright for a discussion about a man's life reduced to documents. He began reading clauses aloud in that detached voice only lawyers can manage, where even the word death sounds like a footnote. Every so often, he smiled at me, a small, rehearsed smile that was supposed to be comforting, but felt like a performance. I wondered how many widows he'd given that same smile to, how many families he'd watched quietly collapse behind polite words and polished pens. People still debate whether lawyers are servants of justice or messengers of opportunism, but in that moment, I saw something else entirely: survival. He was the priest of a secular ritual, guiding my children through the sacred act of inheritance. When he reached the section about the house, I finally sat down. "Mr. Hartman's property shall remain under joint custodianship until the surviving spouse elects to vacate or transfer ownership," he read aloud. I blinked. "Vacate?" I asked. "It's just legal terminology," Mr. Collins said quickly. "It simply means you maintain residence rights until you decide otherwise." But Ethan jumped in before I could speak. "Right, so technically, it's already under shared authority." His tone carried that subtle confidence that comes when someone's already made decisions without asking for permission. Then came the clause that changed the room's temperature. In the event of the surviving spouse's incapacity to manage financial affairs, primary control shall default to the next of kin. The lawyer looked up, probably expecting gratitude for the clarity. I felt my throat tighten. "Are you suggesting I can't manage my own life?" I asked. He hesitated, glanced at Ethan, then back at me. "Of course not, Mrs. Hartman. These are standard safeguards. Your husband was simply being thorough." But the way Ethan shifted in his chair told me everything. This wasn't my husband's doing, it was theirs. I had signed papers months ago trusting my son when he said it was for tax updates. That trust had now become my legal noose. I wanted to scream, but instead I smiled faintly and said, "How thoughtful of him." The lawyer smiled back, relieved that the widow wasn't causing a scene. "You know, there's something about betrayal that changes your hearing. Sounds distort, words echo longer. I could hear Lily's bracelets clinking as she typed notes on her tablet, Claire whispering about insurance, Ethan clearing his throat to hide impatience. It was like being trapped inside a choir that sang in legalese instead of music. After the meeting, Mr. Collins lingered for coffee. "Your husband truly loved his family," he said, stirring sugar into his cup. "He spoke often about ensuring peace among you all." I looked at him carefully and asked, "Did he ever mention me specifically?" He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the window. "Only that he trusted your children to look after you." That word again, trusted. I nodded and said softly, "Then I suppose his trust was misplaced." He chuckled awkwardly, pretending not to understand, but there was a flicker in his expression, pity or guilt, I couldn't tell. Before he left, he handed me a sealed envelope. "Your husband left this with me personally," he said. "He asked that I give it to you privately after the will was settled." My breath caught. "Did anyone else know about it?" "No," he said quickly, "not even your children." He looked uneasy, as if he had broken a rule by even mentioning it. I tucked the envelope into my sweater pocket, feeling the faint outline of folded paper against my palm. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone at the dining table. The house was silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the envelope under the lamplight for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single handwritten letter and a small brass key. My husband's handwriting trembled slightly, as if written during pain or urgency. "My love," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but I feared what would happen if the children knew about the secondary account. I've arranged something for you quietly. The key is to the safe deposit box at Brighton Bank. Use it when you need to. You'll understand everything then. Please don't tell them. Protect yourself." I read it 3 times, each word sinking deeper like an anchor. There it was, the confirmation of what I had sensed but refused to believe. My husband had seen the storm coming long before I did. He knew our children's affection had limits, and he left me a hidden lifeline. I folded the letter carefully and placed it under the cushion of my chair, the one they never sat on. Then I held the brass key in my hand, feeling its weight. Strange how such a tiny thing could feel like both salvation and burden. The next morning, I found Ethan in the study going through files again. I casually asked if Dad ever mentioned Brighton Bank. His head jerked up. Why, he asked too quickly. "Just wondering," I said, keeping my tone light. He stared at me for a long moment before muttering, "No, never heard of it." But the way his eyes darted to the left told me everything. I wasn't the only one who knew about secrets. People still debate whether secrets protect or destroy families. I think they do, both, depending on who holds the key, literally. That night, as I locked my bedroom door for the first time since my husband's death, I whispered into the darkness, "You saw them, didn't you? You knew." The only answer was the faint metallic clink of the key against the nightstand, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. The next morning began with the sound of drawers opening and closing downstairs, followed by muffled voices, trying not to sound suspicious. I stayed in bed a little longer, pretending not to hear, letting the air thicken with their whispers. When I finally came down, Ethan was at the dining table, surrounded by papers. Again, Lily was pacing with her phone, and Claire was rearranging folders, as though this was some corporate meeting. "Morning," I said softly. No one looked up. Ethan only muttered, "We need you to sign a few more things." His voice was rehearsed, too calm, too professional. I poured myself a cup of coffee, watching the steam rise between us like a curtain. "What kind of things?" I asked. Lily finally spoke. "Just bank authorizations. Routine. We need your signature to process the account transitions." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give a child before you take away their toy. "I'll read them first," I said. Ethan frowned. "Mom, you don't have to. This is just procedure. Dad set this all up already. People still debate whether trust is a virtue or a flaw, but I've come to believe it's just a gamble, one you can lose without realizing you've been playing." I took the pen anyway, scanning the first page. The text blurred a little small legal phrases tucked neatly between bigger ones. Temporary relinquishment of control power, of authorization, transfer, of fiduciary authority. My heart sank. I looked up slowly. This isn't about the bank, is it? Ethan sighed impatiently. It's just paperwork, Mom. You're overthinking again. Again. That word stabbed me more than the lie itself. You mean like when I overthought before Dad's will was read? I asked. His expression tightened. Don't start. Lily stepped in, her voice too soft to be sincere. Mom, we're just trying to make things smooth. You don't need the stress of these details. Smooth, such a convenient word. It was their favorite. Smooth meant silent. Smooth meant obedient. I didn't sign that morning. Instead, I told them I needed time to think. That was my first real mistake, because hesitation in their world meant resistance, and resistance had to be managed. That afternoon, Claire knocked on my door holding tea. You should rest, she said kindly. Ethan's just worried about you. She set the cup down, but her eyes flicked to my nightstand where the brass key from my husband's letter lay half hidden under a tissue. Pretty little key? She said casually. My fingers instinctively moved to cover it. Just an old keepsake, I said. She smiled too easily. You were always sentimental. Then she left, closing the door with the kind of silence that feels deliberate. That night, I hid the key inside one of my husband's old woodworking tools in the garage. He'd built a small compartment in the handle of his favorite hammer, a trick he once showed Ethan as a child. Sometimes you hide what's most precious in what looks ordinary, he used to say. I realized with a bitter laugh he was still protecting me even now. The next day, Mr. Collins called to confirm a consent form that I apparently signed. I just wanted to check if you were comfortable with the asset consolidation, he said. My blood ran cold. Asset consolidation, I repeated. Yes, he said, the one Ethan dropped off yesterday. You signed it last week, I believe. I hung up without answering. I hadn't signed anything last week. It took me less than a minute to find the folder on the dining table. There it was, my signature perfectly forged. The strokes were careful, almost loving. I felt dizzy gripping the edge of the table for balance. My own children had signed me out of my own life. You'd think anger would come first, but it was disbelief. How could the same hands I held through fevers and heartbreak now mimic mine for theft? I took a photo of the document with my phone. My hands trembled so badly that the image came out blurry, but I didn't delete it. Proof doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to exist. When Ethan came home that evening, I confronted him quietly. I spoke to Mr. Collins, I said. He froze for a second, then composed himself. Oh, what about... He mentioned a form with my signature, I said slowly. Only I never signed it. He didn't even flinch. You must have forgotten, he said. You've been under a lot of stress. It's incredible how gaslighting feels both insulting and terrifying. The ease in his tone chilled me. He had rehearsed this. I may forget names. Ethan, I said, but I don't forget when someone steals my hand. He laughed lightly. Mom, come on. Nobody's stealing anything. We're just streamlining. Streamlining. That was their new word for erasure. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the house barefoot, tracing the outlines of memories that no longer belonged to me. The dent in the hallway wall from Ethan's toy car, the faint stain from Lily's 10th birthday cake, the creak in the step my husband never fixed because he said it gave the house character. Every mark was a testament to a family I thought existed. But maybe I'd been wrong all along. Maybe family isn't blood, it's just proximity until property enters the equation. There's a lesser-known legal fact: forged signatures on estate documents can nullify an entire will if proven. But that requires evidence, witnesses, and courage, 3 things most widows are assumed not to have. People still debate whether older women are underestimated or just ignored, but either way, it's the same result. You become invisible until they need you to sign something. The next morning, I pretended to forget about the conversation. I smiled. I made pancakes. I told Ethan and Lily they were right, that I was tired and wanted to rest. They looked relieved, mistaking surrender for compliance. We'll take care of everything, Ethan said, patting my shoulder. I nodded, thinking of the photo hidden in my phone of the letter hidden under the chair cushion of the brass key inside the hammer. Sometimes the only power left to you is patience. That night, as the rain started again, I whispered into the dark. You saw it coming, didn't you? And somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear my husband's voice, steady, quiet, certain. Then don't let them finish what they started. And I promised him I wouldn't. Morning sunlight poured through the window, slicing the room into two halves, warmth on one side, shadow on the other. That's how my life felt now, split between what I had and what they wanted. The first thing I noticed that day wasn't the noise of boxes being shuffled downstairs. It was the walls, my walls. They looked bare. Empty hooks where frames used to hang faint outlines of squares left behind like silent ghosts. Every photo of my husband and me together was gone. The family photos with all of us remained, of course. The ones that looked good for guests, where everyone smiled on cue. But the private ones, the quiet memories of love, struggle, laughter, those had vanished. I walked downstairs slowly, my hand gliding over the railing that still carried the faint scent of polish my husband used. Lily was in the living room surrounded by photo frames, stacked face down on the floor. "What are you doing?" I asked. She looked up startled, then smiled thinly. "Oh, just sorting things. Some of these are too old or damaged. We'll scan them later." "Damaged," I repeated, picking up one frame. It was the photo of our 30th wedding anniversary, his arm around me. Both of us laughing under string lights in the garden. The glass wasn't cracked. The picture wasn't faded. It was perfect. "It's not damaged," I said. "It's history." She shrugged. "We don't have space for all of this, Mom. It's time to declutter. Declutter." Another soft word weaponized. I could almost hear my husband's voice in my head whispering, "They'll call it efficiency, but it's erasure." Ethan joined in, arms crossed. "She's right, Mom. We can digitize everything. You'll still have them just online." "Online," I repeated. "Do you mean in a place I don't control?" "Well, it's safer," he said. "No one loses anything in the cloud." I laughed softly. Except the soul of what's real. They didn't understand. They couldn't. To them, the past was clutter. To me, it was proof I'd lived. There's a psychological term for this symbolic displacement. When people remove physical reminders of someone, it's not about tidiness, it's about control. People still debate whether it's conscious cruelty or subconscious guilt, but I think it's both. Later that day, I went to the hallway where our wedding portrait once hung. Only the nail remained. I reached up to touch it, and a drop of rust stained my finger. I wiped it against my dress, leaving a faint smear proof that something real had once held that wall. As I turned, I saw Claire passing by with another frame tucked under her arm. "That one's heavy," I said quietly. She froze. "Oh, I was just moving it to the garage," she said quickly. "Did Lily ask you to?" I asked. Her eyes flicked away. "I thought it might be safer there." Safer. That word again. I smiled tightly. Of course. Everything's safer when it's out of my sight. When they all left for errands later, I went to the garage. There, amid dusty boxes, I found the stack of decluttered photos shoved into a plastic storage bin. Some frames were cracked now, others had been turned upside down. I sat on the floor, pulling them out one by one. My husband's face, my younger smile, our children as toddlers. It all stared back like echoes of a vanished world. And then, at the bottom of the box, I found one I hadn't seen in years. The picture of him standing beside his workbench, his hand resting on that same hammer where I'd hidden the key. The same hammer now guarding our last secret. I carried the photo back to my room. The glass was broken at the corner, but the image was untouched. I set it on my dresser right next to the mirror. When I looked at the reflection, something felt strange. The mirror showed me the older widow with tired eyes, but the photo beside it showed the version of me he used to see, the one who laughed freely, who believed love could survive anything. For a moment, I couldn't tell which version felt more real. I ran my fingers over the photo, tracing his outline. "You knew they'd do this, didn't you?" I whispered. "You tried to leave me a way out." I remembered his letter, how he told me to protect myself. Maybe this was what he meant. Maybe the photos, the memories weren't just sentimental, they were evidence. Evidence of love, of time, of me. That evening, Ethan called everyone to the dining table. "We've decided," he announced, "it's time to start cleaning up the study. There's too much junk in there." "Junk?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "That was your father's sanctuary, and now it's collecting dust," he said. "We'll store everything in the attic." I looked at Lily. She didn't meet my eyes. I wanted to argue, to scream, but I remembered the forged documents, the stolen signature. If I showed my anger, they'd call it instability, and instability would make it easier to take the rest. So I smiled. "You're right," I said softly. "Go ahead." When they left for the night, I slipped into the study alone. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and wood polish. I ran my hands over the desk, tracing the grooves my husband's pen had left over the years. Then I noticed something odd, a faint scratch on the underside of the drawer. I pulled it open, and there taped to the bottom was a folded piece of paper. My heart pounded. I peeled it off carefully and unfolded it. It wasn't a letter, it was a bank statement. Brighton Bank. The same name from the key. The balance was modest, but there was a note scribbled at the bottom in my husband's handwriting, "For her if they forget what love means." I pressed the paper to my chest. My hands trembled not from fear, but from vindication. He had known everything, their greed, their calculation, their inevitable betrayal. People still debate whether foresight is a blessing or a curse. That night I realized it's both. Because knowing doesn't always save you, but it gives you the strength to endure. I replaced the statement exactly where I found it, then looked at the mirror one last time before turning off the light. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't see a widow staring back. I saw a survivor sharpening her silence. The following morning began with an unexpected knock at the door, a soft, hesitant rhythm too polite to be a family member. When I opened it, there stood Margaret, my neighbor for more than 30 years. Her silver hair was tied back, her cardigan buttoned unevenly, as if she'd dressed in a hurry. She looked at me with eyes that carried both kindness and caution. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. It had been weeks since she last visited. She'd kept her distance during the funeral chaos, perhaps sensing the tension that clung to the air in my house like static. I led her to the kitchen, offered her tea, but she refused. "I won't stay long," she said. "I just thought you should know something." She sat down, hands folded tightly. I could see she was nervous. "What is it?" I asked. She looked toward the living room as if afraid someone might overhear. "Your daughter," she whispered. "I saw her yesterday, at the cafe downtown. She was with a man I didn't recognize. They were talking about selling your house." My chest tightened. "Selling my house," I repeated. "Margaret, are you sure?" She nodded. "I'm old, but not deaf." She told him the place was a complicated asset, but that it could be listed discreetly through private channels. I even heard her say, "Mother won't resist much longer." Margaret's voice cracked on that last word. I sat perfectly still, the sound of my heartbeat louder than anything else in the room. People still debate whether betrayal feels like fire or ice. I can tell you it's both. Fire in your chest, ice in your veins. I thanked her, pretending calm, but my fingers trembled as I poured water into the sink just to have something to do. "You didn't hear wrong," I asked. "She truly said that." Margaret nodded again. I wish I hadn't, but she looked so determined. It wasn't the Lily I remember. "Be careful, dear." She reached out and touched my wrist, a small gesture of human solidarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Then she left, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than words. When I turned around, Ethan was standing in the doorway. I hadn't even heard him come in. "Who was that?" he asked. "Just Margaret," I said. "She wanted to check on me." He smirked faintly. "Nosy old woman. She should mind her business." His tone was sharp, too defensive for a casual comment. "What business?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He shrugged. "Oh, you know her. Always gossiping." Then, almost too casually, he added, "We're thinking of getting the house appraised by the way, just to know its value. No decisions yet." The mask was slipping. The timing wasn't coincidence. They knew that I knew, or at least suspected it. I smiled softly and said, "That's a good idea. Knowledge is always useful." His expression flickered with confusion. He didn't expect compliance. That was the moment I realized something crucial. When predators think you're cornered, the last thing they expect is patience. Later that afternoon, I sat in the garden, the same one where my husband had planted roses every spring. Most of them were wilted now, except for one red bloom struggling to stay upright. I knelt beside it, brushing dirt from the petals. "They're planning to sell it," I whispered. The wind answered with a low rustle through the hedges. Somewhere behind me I heard footsteps. Lily's voice followed, soft and rehearsed. "Mom, are you okay out here?" I looked up at her and smiled faintly. "Just saying goodbye to what's left." She frowned. "Don't be dramatic. We're just trying to secure your future." "My future," I repeated, rising slowly. "By selling my past." She sighed, exasperated. "You always make things emotional. It's just a house." I shook my head. "It's never just a house, Lily. It's the only witness that remembers who we used to be." She didn't reply. Instead, she adjusted her sunglasses and said coldly, "You're making it hard for us to help you." Then she walked away, heels crunching the gravel like punctuation marks to a sentence I hadn't finished. That evening, I couldn't shake Margaret's words. I sat in my husband's study holding the brass key again, staring at the hidden bank statement. My husband had anticipated this exact betrayal. He must have sensed it, the same calculation behind their smiles. I knew I had to act soon, but not yet. Timing was everything. If I confronted them now, they'd tighten their grip. If I waited, they might show their full hand. There's a peculiar custom in some cultures when the matriarch feels her family has turned greedy, she hides her wealth inside something ordinary. Sometimes a wall, sometimes an heirloom, sometimes an account under a forgotten name. People still debate whether it's superstition or strategy, but I think it's both. My husband wasn't the kind of man to believe in superstition. He believed in plans. The next morning, I visited Brighton Bank. I told Ethan I was going for a walk to clear my head. It was a short trip just 2 blocks away. The teller was young polite and a bit startled when I handed her the key. "Safety deposit box, 312, I said. She led me to a small, sterile room. When she left me alone, I unlocked the box. Inside was a small envelope with my name and a note in my husband's familiar handwriting. If they turn the house into a battlefield, let them have it. You already own what matters. Beneath the note was a checkbook, one tied to a quiet account under my maiden name. Enough money to start over anywhere I wanted. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I smiled, a strange calm settling in. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel powerless. When I got home, Lily was waiting at the door, her arms crossed. "Where were you?" she asked. "Walking," I said. "You were gone for hours." "Grief makes time move funny," I replied. She stared at me suspiciously, but I just smiled. "You should be careful," I said lightly. "People around here love to talk." She tilted her head. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just a friendly warning," I said. "Not everyone's as loyal as they appear." As I walked past her into the house, I could feel her eyes burning into my back. But I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The power had shifted even if they didn't know it yet, and somewhere faintly I could almost hear my husband's voice again, steady and proud. "Good girl. Let them underestimate you." That night, sleep refused to visit me. The house creaked like it always did, but this time I felt as though the walls themselves were whispering secrets, reminders of footsteps, laughter, arguments, and promises that had once lived within them. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the moonlight crawling slowly across the plaster like a patient ghost. Somewhere in the hallway, I heard the soft sound of a drawer sliding open. Someone was searching again. They'd started doing that lately, quietly late at night, believing I was asleep. I no longer confronted them. I let them think I was oblivious. In truth, I was watching, waiting. The next morning, I went back to my husband's study, that sacred space they wanted to turn into storage. The curtains were half-drawn dust hanging in the air like frozen time. I began pulling out drawers methodically, not for sentimental reasons this time, but with a deliberate curiosity. I wasn't searching for comfort. I was searching for truth. That's when I noticed the bottom panel of the desk, slightly uneven as if someone had tampered with it. I pressed on the corner gently and the panel lifted. Beneath it lay a flat leather folder, the kind my husband used for important contracts. Inside there was another envelope, this one sealed with wax and marked in his handwriting, "For my wife if they fail the test." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside there were several folded pages, legal documents, notarized and signed. The heading made my breath catch: Last Will and Testament, Addendum 2. My heart raced as I began reading. This wasn't the will that Mr. Collins had read aloud at the table. This was different, sharper, more deliberate. It stated that the initial will was to be executed only if his wife, me, declined active management of the estate. But if I was deemed capable and willing, sole authority reverted to me and all transfers of ownership to secondary beneficiaries, my children would be legally void. At the bottom was a signature, my husband's clear and steady, and 2 witness signatures. One was a name I didn't recognize. The other was the notary's stamp. And there, scribbled in faint ink at the margin, was a line that made me shiver. "Collins has a copy. Trust him only when you show this one." I sat back in the chair, the paper trembling in my hands. My husband had made a backup will, one that overrode the first, but only if I had the courage to reveal it. He had known this day would come, that our children, blind with entitlement, would circle like vultures. He had even tested them with the first version, perhaps, to see how quickly love would decay when gold entered the conversation. People still debate whether family loyalty can survive inheritance, but my husband clearly didn't need a debate. He'd already made his conclusion. The next step was obvious but dangerous. I needed to confront Mr. Collins, the lawyer, but I couldn't risk going openly. Ethan or Lily would find out, and once they knew I had a legal trump card, they'd bury me under claims of confusion or senility. I'd seen that story before in other families in newspaper headlines. Elderly widow, declared incompetent after contesting will. It's a quiet epidemic no one talks about. So the next day, I pretended to take my usual morning walk. I wore a scarf, sunglasses, and carried my husband's old leather bag, the same one he used to take to the bank. It felt symbolic somehow. I walked the 2 blocks to Collins and Marin Law Firm, my heart pounding with every step. Inside, the receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Hartman," she said kindly, "Mr. Collins is with a client, but he can see you in a few minutes." I nodded and waited. The office smelled like lemon polish and cold ambition. When I finally entered his office, he looked surprised to see me alone. "Mrs. Hartman," he said, rising to shake my hand. "I wasn't expecting you today." "That makes 2 of us," I replied. I sat down and placed the sealed addendum on his desk. "Do you recognize this?" He blinked. His polite smile faltered. "Where did you—" "It was in my husband's study," I said, interrupting. "Under the desk panel." He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "I see," he murmured, running a finger along the wax seal. "He told me about this years ago. He wasn't sure he'd ever need it." "He did," I said quietly. "And now so do I," he nodded. "Then we'll have to proceed carefully. If your children learn about this before we file the claim, they could freeze your accounts temporarily under suspicion of mental distress. It happens more than you'd think." I gave a bitter laugh. "I don't need to think. I'm living it." He studied the document for several minutes, his brow furrowed. "This changes everything," he said at last. "You'll regain full control of the estate, effective immediately upon verification. I'll have to contact the registrar discreetly to record this version." "How long will it take?" I asked. "A few days, maybe less." Before I left, he looked at me gravely. "You should stay calm until then. Let them think you're compliant. The less they suspect, the safer this process will be." Walking home, I felt lighter, but also haunted. Lighter because justice was finally shifting my way. Haunted because I knew what would happen once my children found out. They would see me not as a mother reclaiming dignity, but as an enemy withholding their prize. That evening, as I cooked dinner, I watched them closely. Lily was on her laptop again, whispering into her phone about buyers and timelines. Ethan was calculating something on paper mortgage figures, probably. They didn't notice my silence. They never did. I wondered if they'd ever look at me again without seeing a financial obstacle. After dinner, I went upstairs to my room. The mirror on my dresser reflected the faint glow of the hallway light. I looked at my reflection for a long time, studying the lines, the tired eyes, the calm set of my mouth. I thought about all the times I'd believed motherhood was a guarantee of loyalty. But motherhood, I realized, doesn't protect you from your children. It only gives them the tools to destroy you if they choose to. Still, I didn't cry. Not anymore. Grief had hardened into resolve. That night, around midnight, I heard a car door outside. Curious, I looked through the curtains. Lily was sitting in her car on the phone again. Her voice carried faintly through the open window. "Yes, we can have it listed privately." "No, she doesn't know. I'll handle her." I watched her silhouette illuminated by the dashboard light, my daughter, my blood scheming against me like a stranger in a crime story. I should have been angry, but I felt oddly detached. Maybe that's what clarity feels like, the absence of surprise. I went back to my desk, pulled out a pen, and wrote a small note on the back of my husband's photo. "They failed the test, love. But I won't." 2 days later, Mr. Collins called. "It's done," he said. "The second will has been verified and registered. You now have full control of the estate." Quietly. "No notifications have gone out yet. It's your decision when to reveal it." I thanked him, hung up, and sat in silence. The weight of the decision pressed against my chest like a living thing. I could expose them immediately, humiliate them legally, but part of me wanted them to show their full greed first to prove beyond doubt what they had become. That evening, I joined them for dinner, acting as if nothing had changed. I poured wine, made small talk, even laughed when my grandson told a silly joke. And when Lily mentioned house buyers visiting next week, I smiled and said, "That sounds exciting. I hope they like what they see." Ethan looked up sharply. "You're okay with it?" "Of course," I said sweetly. "I'm just tired, dear. Maybe it's time for change." They relaxed instantly, mistaking calm for surrender. It was almost amusing watching them plan their own downfall at my table. Later, after everyone went to bed, I went to the study once more. I opened my husband's desk, pulled out the first will. The fake one they believed in, and burned it carefully over a candle. The ashes floated like black snow before settling into the trash bin. Then I whispered to the air, "Now it's just yours and mine again." People still debate whether revenge can coexist with love, but I wasn't seeking revenge. I was protecting the last truth of a man who loved me enough to see the storm coming and leave behind an umbrella made of ink and faith. That night, as the clock struck midnight, I sat by the window holding his photograph. The house for once didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like justice still waiting to be served, and somewhere in the rustle of the wind through the rose bushes, I could almost hear him say, "You've always been stronger than you think." It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind of bright, deceptive day that looks peaceful from the outside, but hums with hidden tension underneath. The house was unusually busy. Lily was on a call, Ethan was printing something in the study, and Claire was rearranging furniture again, saying she was prepping for the appraiser. I played along, I made coffee, offered snacks, smiled like the fragile widow they believed I was, but inside my heart beat in a steady, deliberate rhythm. Because I knew that by nightfall, nothing in this house would be the same again. Mr. Collins had told me the registration for the second will was complete. The estate was legally mine now. Not shared, not conditional, sole ownership. I'd asked him to bring the certified documents that morning, but to enter quietly through the back gate. Timing was everything, and if I knew my children well, I knew they'd give me the perfect excuse to end this farce. At 10 a.m., I was sitting at the dining table pretending to read when Lily came in holding her phone. "Mom," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Can we talk?" I nodded. She sat across from me, crossing her legs, the perfect image of composed self-righteousness. "We've decided it's best if you move into a smaller place, somewhere with less responsibility, maybe closer to town." She smiled faintly like she was doing me a favor. "We've even spoken to a realtor who specializes in senior transitions." I raised an eyebrow. "Senior transitions?" I repeated. "That's a nice way of saying, get out of the way, isn't it?" She blinked, feigning surprise. "Mom, don't make it sound harsh. You'll thank us later. You'll have less stress, more comfort." "And what happens to the house?" I asked. Ethan entered just then, holding a stack of papers. "We've already started the process," he said calmly. "The buyers are coming tomorrow. It's a good deal and the money will be evenly divided." "Evenly divided," I echoed. "Between whom?" "Us," he said, with a look that almost bordered on pity. "You'll get your share, of course, but you don't really need all this space. It's just logical. Logical. Such a clean word for betrayal." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. "You know," I said quietly, "your father used to say logic without love is just cruelty in disguise." They didn't respond. So I smiled. "Would you mind if I read something aloud?" Lily frowned. "Now, we're in the middle of—" "It'll only take a minute," I interrupted, standing slowly. My knees cracked, reminding me of my age, but I didn't care. "It's something your father left for me. Something I found recently." Ethan exchanged a wary glance with Lily. "Mom, this isn't the time." "Oh, I think it is," I said, my voice calm but firm. I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out the folded legal envelope Mr. Collins had given me that morning. The gold notary seal glinted in the sunlight. I laid it on the table between us. "Recognize this." They stared. "What is that?" Lily asked. "It's the second will," I said. "The real one." The silence that followed was almost musical. Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's impossible," he said. "Dad only had one will." "That's what you thought," I replied. "He left this one hidden for me. He knew what you'd do." I turned to Lily. "He knew you'd try to sell his home before his chair even cooled. He knew you'd talk about me like a burden instead of a mother." Lily's lips trembled, but her voice stayed sharp. "You're confused, Mom. You've been under stress." "Oh, don't start with that," I said. "The doctor cleared me last month. I'm perfectly sound. More sound than both of you, apparently." I opened the document, slowly savoring the crackle of paper, and began reading aloud. "This addendum revokes all prior instructions and grants full control of the estate to my wife, Eleanor Hartman, provided she demonstrates capacity and willingness to manage. All secondary transfers are void." Ethan's face turned pale. "That's not legal," he snapped. "Mr. Collins wouldn't allow that. He's the one who filed it, I said. You can call him if you like. In fact, I gestured toward the kitchen. He's here now. Right on cue, Mr. Collins stepped into the doorway, briefcase in hand, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. "Sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Hartman asked me to deliver some documents." He placed a folder on the table and looked at me. "Everything's official now." Ethan stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "You knew about this," he demanded. Collins nodded. "Your father entrusted me with it personally." "This is insane," Lily said, her voice rising. "She can't handle this on her own." Collins smiled politely. "The court disagrees. She's been declared fully capable of managing all affairs." The color drained from Lily's face. Claire, who had been silent until now, whispered, "Does that mean—" "Yes," I said, meeting her eyes. "It means I own everything. The house, the accounts, even your father's workshop. Every single thing you tried to take from me." Ethan's composure cracked. "We were trying to help," he shouted. "You're twisting this. We didn't want things to get messy." "Messy," I repeated. "You forged my signature, Ethan." His mouth fell open. "What?" "Don't bother denying it. Mr. Collins has the documents. I took photos." For a moment, no one spoke. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Lily's voice came out a whisper. "Dad would never have wanted this kind of division." "He didn't create it," I said quietly. "You did." Ethan sank into his chair, staring at the floor. "So what now?" he asked bitterly. I looked at them both and said, "Now you learned something you should have known all along. Nothing built on greed survives. People still debate whether confrontation heals or destroys families." I don't know the answer. All I know is that truth once spoken aloud doesn't go back into hiding. Collins gathered the papers and left, leaving behind an unbearable silence. Lily finally stood up, tears in her eyes, though whether they were from guilt or humiliation, I couldn't tell. "You'll regret this," she whispered. Maybe I said softly, but at least it'll be my regret. That afternoon, they packed their things. No goodbyes, no apologies, just the sound of zippers and the heavy steps of departure. Claire avoided my gaze, perhaps the only one among them who still had a trace of shame. When the door finally closed behind them, the house felt heavier for a moment, then lighter, like it had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I walked through each room slowly, running my fingers over the walls, the furniture, the photographs that still remained. The silence was no longer hostile. It was peaceful, even proud. The house had chosen its side. As evening fell, I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the roses sway in the wind. The sky burned orange and red, the same colors my husband loved to paint at sunset. I whispered, "We did it." And for a fleeting second, I swore I felt a presence beside me, gentle and approving. Later that night, as the world outside went quiet, I thought of how quickly love can turn to calculation, how trust becomes a currency, and how family can feel like strangers once money enters the equation. But I also thought of resilience, of how sometimes the smallest act of faith, like a hidden key or a secret will, can keep a legacy alive. People still debate whether justice ever truly feels good. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's not supposed to. Maybe justice is just peace wearing its hardest face. When I went to bed, I looked at my husband's photograph on the nightstand and said softly, "They're gone. It's just us again." And as I closed my eyes for the first time in months, I didn't dream of betrayal or loss. I dreamed of roses blooming endlessly, of laughter returning to the house, and of a woman finally reclaiming her name. The morning after they left was eerily calm, the kind of silence that no longer feels empty but deliberate, like the house was waiting to see what I'd do next. Sunlight fell through the open curtains onto the wooden floor where boxes had once been stacked, and for the first time in months, there was no scent of coffee that wasn't mine, no footsteps that didn't belong to me. The air had changed. It was lighter, freer, almost kind. I sat at the dining table with my tea, staring at the space where my children had argued over my future just a day earlier. The chairs were empty now, yet they seemed to hold the ghosts of their words. I thought about what Mr. Collins had said before he left yesterday. You have the power to forgive or to forget, but you don't owe them both. Those words lingered with me as I moved through the house, touching the photographs that still remained, the ones they hadn't taken. I was no longer looking at them through the eyes of loss, but of survival. Every mark, every stain, every dent in the wood was proof that I had lived a real life. People still debate whether victory over betrayal brings happiness or just relief. I think it brings clarity, the kind that hurts but heals in the same breath. That afternoon, I walked into my husband's study again. The sunlight poured through the window onto his old desk. The scent of wood and paper lingered faintly, and on the chair sat the framed photo I'd placed there after everything ended our wedding day. I ran my fingers along the edge of the frame and whispered, "It's done, love. They failed your test." I half expected silence, but in the stillness, I felt something warm settle inside me, a strange calm, as though the air itself answered. Then I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A drawer, tiny thin, hidden at the bottom of the bookshelf. I had never seen it, and yet it blended perfectly with the grain of the wood. My husband's craftsmanship was meticulous, secretive even. My heart thudded as I knelt and pulled it open. Inside was a small velvet pouch tied with an old string. Inside that pouch, a gold locket and another folded letter. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was his steady, careful, unmistakable. If you're reading this, it began, then you've survived what I feared most, not my death, but the aftermath of it. I always knew how much of yourself you poured into this family. You gave them more love than they could measure, and yet people only value what they must earn. This locket is yours. Inside is the key to one last account under your name alone. It's not about money, it's about freedom. Use it not to escape, but to begin again. And remember, my love, you were never meant to live in the shadows of those who forgot the light that raised them. I pressed the locket to my heart, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. It wasn't just gold, it was everything he couldn't say while alive, condensed into something tangible. His last gift wasn't wealth, it was vindication, wrapped in love. People still debate whether the dead can protect the living. I used to think that was superstition, but standing there with his letter, I realized the dead can protect us through the wisdom they leave behind. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sunset. The roses in the garden glowed red against the fading light. I thought about Ethan and Lily. I wondered if they'd regret it someday, or if they'd tell their children that greed had cost them a mother. Maybe they'd twist the story, make me sound cruel, paranoid, or selfish. But stories like inheritances always come full circle. One day their children might look for love in a place they abandoned, and the silence will answer them the same way it once answered me. I decided to leave the house for a while, not to run, but to rest. Brighton Bank still held the quiet account my husband had secured. It was enough to let me start fresh in a small seaside town we once dreamed of retiring to, but never did. Maybe I'd buy a small cottage with blue shutters, keep a garden, and host tea for neighbors who still believed in kindness. I smiled at the thought. "You planned everything," I whispered, "even this ending." Before I left the house that night, I wrote 2 letters, one for Ethan, one for Lily. I didn't write accusations or anger, just truth. To Ethan, I wrote, "You once told me I was overthinking. I hope someday you realize I was only overloving." To Lily, I wrote, "You thought I wouldn't resist. You were right, I didn't resist hate. I resisted becoming like you." I placed both letters on the table where the forged documents once lay. Let them read those words and understand that a mother's silence isn't weakness, it's restraint. Then for the last time, I walked through each room. The study, the living room, the staircase lined with fading paint marks from the children's heights, the kitchen that still smelled faintly of vanilla. Each space carried an echo, but not of pain of memory, the kind of memory that no betrayal can erase. Before locking the door, I whispered, "You're free now," both to the house and to myself. That night, I checked into a small inn near the coast. The sea air was sharp and pure, and for the first time in years, I slept without fear of footsteps in the dark. When I woke up, sunlight spilled through sheer curtains, and the sound of gulls filled the morning. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the waves crash endlessly against the shore, strong, relentless, eternal. Just like the truth. There's something poetic about endings. They never happen when you expect them, and they never look how you imagine. Sometimes they come with paperwork and fire, sometimes with forgiveness, and sometimes with quiet. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need apologies. All I needed was peace, and that's exactly what he gave me. People still debate whether love can outlive betrayal. I think it can. Because love, real love, isn't about loyalty in the good days. It's about choosing not to become the monster that wounded you. That night, I sat on the balcony of the inn, wrapped in a blanket, the locket warm against my skin. The ocean whispered the same lullaby my husband used to hum on sleepless nights. I closed my eyes, breathing in the salt, the freedom, the finality. And somewhere deep within the rhythm of the waves, I heard it again. His voice faint but certain. "You're home now." And I was. Hey guys, if you're still here after all this, take a breath with me. I know this story wasn't easy. It never is when love turns into something sharp enough to cut. Tonight's journey wasn't about money or revenge. It was about something quieter, something heavier, the moment a woman realizes her worth, long after everyone else has forgotten it. You see, we spend our lives building families, giving everything we have, believing love guarantees loyalty. But sometimes love is the very thing people weaponize against us. And yet, if there's one truth I've learned from Eleanor's story, it's this: strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just signs one last document, packs a quiet bag, and walks away without slamming the door. People still debate whether walking away is defeat or freedom, but maybe it's both, the price of peace paid in silence. If you've ever felt discarded, underestimated, or made small by the people you raised, know this: your story isn't over when they stop caring. It's over when you stop believing you matter, and you do. So before you leave tonight, look around your own life. Ask yourself, what's the one thing worth protecting, even if everyone else calls it just a house, just a memory, just a dream, because sometimes that just is everything that keeps you human. Thank you for staying with me tonight, for listening. Feeling, remembering. If you haven't yet, take a moment to subscribe and share this story with someone who might need it. Someone who forgot that dignity is the most valuable inheritance of all. Now turn off the lights, breathe deep, and let the silence mean peace again. Good night, my friends, and may your home always remember your name.